Sweet.
George, I'm looking at you.
Yep, it's wonderful to have you here, Senator. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about student engagement. My first question to you specifically is why visit Arizona, and especially here at Arizona State?
George, Arizona is critical to the future of our country. In the last election, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were elected president because Arizona went their way by just 10,000 votes. And going all the way back to Harry Truman, the only other Democrat who's won Arizona was Bill Clinton. So it's a big state, it's got a lot of electoral votes, and I'm at Arizona State University because the student vote is particularly important if we have any hope of winning.
What's on the line for students this election?
Your future, whether or not college is affordable, whether or not we combat climate change, whether or not we have an economy of opportunity, whether or not we win the 21st century. As I was driving into Phoenix this morning, I drove past the TSMC semiconductor plant at the very northern end of Phoenix. It's astonishing. It is massive. And it's jobs of the future for tens of thousands of Arizonans. I worked in a high-tech industry in a manufacturing company for 8 years that actually has facilities here in Arizona, as well as in Delaware, where I'm from. I know how hard it is for us to continue to innovate, continue to be at the cutting edge of technology and of manufacturing. We've seen out of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democratic majority in the Senate the decisions to reduce student loan debt, to combat climate change, to invest in innovation, to invest in the economy of the 21st century. I have every confidence that Donald Trump will not support those decisions and take us in a different and wrong direction, and that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will take us in the right direction.
What other avenues can students take besides voting that will help benefit the Democratic ticket?
Vote early and then go help someone else vote. I've worked on campaigns back to when I was in college, and I love working on campaigns. In fact, I'm going from here to a student canvass, a student rally. So students who are interested in politics, first make sure you read your ballot and get educated about all the different propositions and initiatives. Make sure you know about who you're voting for, but please make sure you vote for Ruben Gallego for the U.S. Senate, who is a decorated Marine veteran, currently serving House member, and someone who will be a great senator, and vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
What does the Harris-Waltz campaign have to offer to student voters, specifically people who are spending tuition?
First, more than $100 billion in student loan debt has been forgiven under the Biden-Harris administration, even though the Supreme Court has blocked them over and over. They would have forgiven far more, but for the conservative Supreme Court stopping them. What else does the future have to offer? As I've said before, innovation, competitiveness, values, and a path towards combating climate change. We've also been, under the Biden-Harris administration, the Democratic Party has been forward-leaning on LGBTQ+ rights. We've been inclusive. We've recognized that America's at its best when it's diverse, when it's inclusive, and when it's rooted in justice.
How does President Joe Biden represent Delaware? You wrote in a recent article in July with the Delaware Online about how Joe Biden is a true Delawarean. Could you expand a little bit on that?
He is. He was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, but he moved to Claymont, Delaware as a young man when his father lost his job. And Claymont is a blue-collar, it was a steel town. There was a steel mill right down at the river. He grew up just up the hill from it. But he is someone who made his way through parochial schools and to the University of Delaware, actually played football at UD, and joined the civil rights movement and became a public defender, and then ran for office back in 1970 when he saw racial inequality, the lack of opportunity, the embedded injustice in our state, and he has been working for us ever since his first election to the Senate in 1972. Part of why I say he's a real Delawarean is in his gut, he's fighting for working people and to make sure that we continue to be an inclusive state of opportunity, but he also worked across the aisle. He figured out how to make progress possible by respecting Republicans and legislating with them. And when he was sworn in, now almost 4 years ago, and he gave this speech about, the possibilities of bipartisanship, lots of folks dismissed him and said, oh, that's out of date. Have you never met Mitch McConnell? But I'll remind you, under the Biden-Harris administration, we've signed into law the biggest investments in manufacturing, in infrastructure, the most important gun safety bill, the best veterans health package, the biggest investments in community mental health in decades. He was able to make bipartisanship work. And when it didn't, He was willing to do party line Democratic votes to reduce prescription drugs and to invest in fighting climate change. So I think he's got a strong record, and I think that's rooted in Delaware and Delaware's values.
How does President Joe Biden dropping out of the race and leaving it to a younger candidate, Vice President Kamala Harris, help? Is that effective to the student vote?
Well, poll after poll showed that particularly younger Americans were concerned that although Joe Biden had been a great president, they didn't see him as having the energy and the capability to serve a full 4-year term. And bluntly, they looked at Donald Trump, who's 78 years old and not in great health and not making great statements at his speeches. So I think there's been some enthusiasm for Kamala Harris because of the change that she represents. She's been a good and loyal and supportive vice president for Joe Biden. But as she's recently made clear, she will be a different president with a different life experience, a different set of core values, and a different set of priorities for our country. I'm excited to be a co-chair of her campaign. I think she's going to be a great president.
We see Vice President Kamala Harris use upbeat music and adapt a lot with social media. I was wondering, is this effective to the college student vote?
You'll have to tell me. I'm not a college student. But I think the fact that she's not just gone on 60 Minutes, which is watched by folks of my age, but done an interview with Charlemagne the God, for example, gone on podcasts, gone on TikTok, gone on social media interviews, helps her connect. My children are 25, 25, and 23 and are just out of college themselves. She connects in a much more immediate and engaging way with them than I do.
What have you noticed in your extensive career as a U.S. Senator in the college vote? Has it been becoming more effective? Have they been increasing engagement, or has it been decreasing?
Absolutely. It was critical to the 2020 election. Younger Americans are realizing that their votes count, that their future matters, and that those two connect. If you don't take advantage of the opportunity to have your voice heard and to use the power of your vote, you can't complain about the choice that results. For years, when I was working in campaigns in the 90s, we would talk about how we're going to get out the student vote, and it never quite materialized. In 2020, the student vote was critical, especially in the handful of states where Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were elected by a few thousand votes. Voting is powerful, and young people have that power in their hands.
You co-sponsored an act in September with U.S. Senator Tom Carper on a resolution reaffirming access to an emergency health care, including abortion care. What's at risk this election with abortion, and how does that tie with students who are very involved in abortion as a topic?
The fact that when Trump was president, he put a conservative, I would say super conservative, activist majority on the Supreme Court. He got to choose 3 Supreme Court justices, and I'm on the Judiciary Committee. I questioned all 3 of them. I voted against all 3 of them. I thought their views and their values on jurisprudence were going to take the United States in the wrong direction. And I was right. They voted to repeal Roe versus Wade, a 50-year settled protection for reproductive freedom in the United States. And that has mobilized, that has engaged, that has gravely concerned people of all ages and backgrounds in our country. If you look at Justice Thomas's concurrence in the Dobbs decision that reversed Roe versus Wade, he points where he'd like to go next, taking on protections for same-sex marriage, for example, or contraception. And now in state after state, and Arizona is one of them, we're seeing how the re-energized, antiquated laws, so-called zombie laws, I think in Arizona it was from 1864, when this wasn't even a state, a territory, that impose deep, broad, and unforgiving bans on access to reproductive care. This puts women's health care at risk. And so what's at risk this fall? You will see a national abortion ban taken up and passed in Congress if there is a next Trump presidency and a Republican majority in the Senate. We cannot let that happen.
You also authored the No Ban Act during the Trump presidency. What's at stake this election with immigration policy, and what about the Harris-Waltz ticket border policy speak the most to you?
So the No Ban Act was an attempt, I wasn't able to get any Republicans to join me, but an attempt to reverse the decision of the Supreme Court that ultimately facilitated the, I think, unjust and hateful ban on Muslims coming to the United States that was Donald Trump's initial goal. He is again saying in his campaign right now that he wants to ban Muslims from coming to the United States because he sees them as being responsible for extremism and terrorism. Religious-based discrimination is one of the worst parts of American history and is something we should not repeat again. There are millions of Muslims in the United States, many of whom serve in law enforcement, in our armed forces, who are great members of our community and who are supporters of our Constitution, to assume that someone should not be allowed to come to the United States to visit family, to study as a student, to help start a business, just because of their religion is the worst sort of bigotry.
With polling locations opening up across all 4 campuses at ASU, I wanted to ask you, if you were talking to a student right now who is undecided, what would you say?
Go vote. Do your homework. Agree with me that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are the best president and vice president for you and for our country, hopefully, and go vote. Lots of folks have the best intentions. Oh, yeah, I'll get to that. And they put it off, and then something happens on election day. They're sick, they've got an exam, they need to go home, and they forget to vote. My own kids have voted several times in elections where I know it was because my wife was texting them and calling, oh, right, I meant to do that. So go do it early. That also means the odds that we're going to be calling and texting you from the Democratic Party of Arizona go down. So vote early. Make sure you vote in a way that is in your best interest and advances a just and inclusive future, and then help other people get the chance to vote. Just 10,000 votes moved Arizona into the blue column, the winning column in 2020. The campus of Arizona State University on its own could produce those 10,000 votes.
That's perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Senator. It was great to have you here.
Thank you, George.